What would happen if one morning America could no longer export a single pound of wheat, a pickup truck, or even a familiar cold medicine tablet? Don't think that's far-fetched, because right now, the 7 largest seaports in the world are quietly closing their doors to American goods. An entire $2.5 trillion export empire is on the verge of total paralysis, and the consequences are already evident at the supermarket near your home. Empty shelves, prices doubling, delayed deliveries. If these 7 ports stop accepting shipments, the entire US export system will completely collapse. The biggest question now is who will fall first. Watch the video now and note that this information is compiled from statistical data and is not intended to defame any organization or individual. Number 1. Hamburg, Germany. If you think a seaport all the way across the Atlantic like Hamburg has nothing to do with your daily life in Ohio or Michigan, think again, because right now as Hamburg closes its gates to American goods, the price of new cars is soaring. Car repair parts are becoming scarce, and harvesters in the Midwest risk being stranded in summer fields. Hamburg is not just an ordinary port. It functions like a regulating valve for the entire transatlantic industrial machine. According to the Hamburg Port Authority, this port handles over 8 million TEUs of cargo annually, with trade with the US alone accounting for 685,000 TEUs, a number sufficient to keep America's automotive, aerospace, and agricultural machinery industries running smoothly. Thanks to this lifeline, companies like Ford and GM have been able to import components from Bosch and Siemens for years to assemble electric cars and pickup trucks in Detroit, Ohio, and Illinois. This has kept production lines intact, American car prices reasonable, and most importantly, thousands of workers steadily employed each day. But in mid-May, due to changes in trade policy, Hamburg tightened this flow. No grand announcement, just silent action. 70% of US-related cargo volume was reduced. Containers with sensors, control modules, and auto parts no longer left the docks on time. Immediately, Ford had to pause its electric vehicle assembly line in Michigan, and GM delayed assembly in Ohio. Thousands of workers had their shifts shortened, and some were advised to take temporary, unpaid leave. These companies were forced to consider investing an additional $4 billion to produce components themselves. But the question is, when will that be enough to replace the familiar imports from Germany? You may have already noticed the consequences in your own wallet. The price of a new Ford F-150 has increased by $3,000, not because the company wants to make life harder for customers, but because German parts are blocked, driving up production costs. Used vehicles must now be kept longer, and every breakdown becomes more painful, because replacement parts arrive slowly. According to the Automotive Service Association, the cost of replacing parts imported from Europe has risen by 35%, meaning every car repair could cost an extra $500–700. For those already struggling to make ends meet with soaring gas and electricity prices, this is truly bad news. And the domino chain continues to fall. When factories cut shifts and workers lose jobs, they spend less. When spending drops, local grocery stores and diners go quiet. The entire local economy, dependent on industrial production, begins to slow like a machine running without oil. The Economic Policy Institute warns that if this situation drags on for another 3 months, the Midwest alone could lose over 50,000 more jobs, mostly middle-aged workers, those who are skilled in old trades and find it hard to switch industries during this period. Farmers in Iowa and Kansas are not spared either. Delays in German-made tractor and harvester parts are disrupting preparations for the summer season. Some small farmers have already been reminded by banks about equipment loans as broken machines await unavailable replacement parts. Additionally, the cost of fertilizer imported from Europe has increased by 15–20% due to longer shipping times and higher transportation costs through Hamburg, according to the latest report from C.H. Robinson. The irony is that Hamburg is currently receiving German investment to upgrade its infrastructure modernization, automation, and new rail lines. But at the same time, the gate to the US is being twisted shut like a tightening valve. Berlin appears to be playing a cautious chess game, investing for the long term, but remaining flexible enough to use trade as a tool of pressure when necessary. And a bigger question lies elsewhere. Germany is quietly encouraging Canada to consider the possibility of joining the EU in the distant future, or according to sources from The Guardian and Brussels Times. A subtle suggestion, but in a context where Canada is also gradually cooling toward Washington, it's akin to a longtime neighbor no longer warmly offering morning tea, but instead shaking hands with a new friend across the street. But Hamburg is only the first shot fired. When this valve is tightened, who can guarantee that other ports like Vancouver, Busan, or Santos won't follow suit? And you, whether in the Midwest or on the coast, will feel the impact through every repair bill, every empty supermarket shelf, every shortened shift. Not just when the financial news airs. The question now is no longer, what's happening in Hamburg, but rather, which port is next, and does America have the strength to reopen the valves that are gradually closing? Can you guess number 2, Vancouver, Canada? The second name might not surprise you, but it will surely disappoint you more. After our European neighbor, Hamburg, closed its gates to American industry, now our closest partner, Canada, is erecting another wall in Vancouver. This gate has slammed shut in front of American agricultural products, leaving corn, soybeans, and wheat in the Midwest stuck unable to reach the world. Vancouver has long been a vital bridge helping millions of tons of grain from Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas reach major buyers in Asia, such as Japan, South Korea, and China. In 2024, this port handled 3.47 million TEUs and over 158 million tons of goods, an enormous volume that the U.S. agricultural sector relies on to survive. But everything changed in the first months of 2025. Due to fraying neighborly relations, every shipment of American agricultural goods to Vancouver now faces obstacles even before leaving the country. Stuck on the road before even reaching the sea. You may begin to notice it on your weekly grocery trip. Prices of Canadian imported fruits and vegetables have increased by 15 to 20% according to the latest USDA report. An avocado, a few tomatoes, the things you buy for dinner, now cost a few dollars more per pound. One might think domestic supply would increase and prices would fall, but no. Because export orders were canceled, storage facilities are full, and although short-term domestic prices may dip higher, storage and transport costs are causing supermarkets like Walmart near your home to run short on fresh produce, replacing it with frozen goods. Lower quality and no cheaper. The shelves appear full but are actually empty because goods are stuck in transit or haven't made it out of Vancouver. In the Midwest, farmers stare at silos full of corn and soybeans not knowing who to sell to. Banks are starting to demand repayment on harvester loans as the upcoming season risks being wasted. Union Pacific and BNSF have reduced rail shipments to Vancouver, putting truck drivers temporarily out of work, canceling loads and leaving goods sitting idle in warehouses. Domestic corn and soybean prices in the US have dropped over 15% since the start of the year, because there's no export market to absorb that massive volume. What about Apple and Tesla? Don't forget that the iPhone you're holding, once a symbol of American tech pride, depends on Canadian aluminum. When aluminum tariffs rise and supply tightens, Apple faces two unpleasant choices: either raise the new iPhone price by $200, $300, or change materials. And you may soon notice the next-gen iPhone, which should be durable and sturdy, might be thinner, lighter, even more prone to scratches and dents, because it must use cheaper replacement alloys. Tesla isn't any better off. Canadian aluminum is a key ingredient in Tesla EV bodies. When supply shrinks, car prices may rise by several $1,000s. Something American buyers will definitely feel during the year-end delivery season. And across the border, what are Canadians thinking? Many people in British Columbia and Alberta believe this is an opportunity for self-reliance to reduce dependence on their old neighbor. So they can seek partners further away, but more relaxed like Europe. It's no coincidence that Canadian media recently mentioned the idea that Canada might one day join the EU, a delicate yet meaningful hint about finding new trade partners as relations with the US cool. And for you, an average American, what does this mean? That fresh goods at Walmart and Target will become scarcer and more expensive, that electronic shipments and assembly parts from Canada will be delayed, making the final products at Best Buy or Amazon costlier. Be cautious if the supermarket shelves near you start emptying. Number 3, Rotterdam, Netherlands. Rotterdam. Are you clutching your heart medication or insulin bottle, unsure if there's enough to last through next month? Rotterdam, Europe's largest port, is tightening medical trade, and you are the one being hit the hardest. When this logistics giant shuts its doors, the US medical equipment and drug export system faces a crisis with consequences felt not on news tickers, but on the pharmacy shelves at your local Walgreens or CVS. Rotterdam is like an artificial heart valve in America's healthcare supply chain. Each year, this port handles up to 15.3 million TEUs and 468 million tons of goods. Still a record level as of the mid-2020s. Among this, the EU exported about $19.5 billion in medical equipment to the US, with the Netherlands alone contributing $9.38 billion, accounting for over 38% of total pharmaceutical imports from the EU. If Rotterdam is blocked, the heart valve is shut. Ventilators, artificial heart valves, dialysis filters, auto-injectors, all are left waiting, unable to reach US hospitals in time. Imagine you're over 60 living in Boston or Philadelphia, scheduled for a heart valve replacement later this year. But this week the hospital calls to say we're short on equipment. Please wait 2 more months. Your medication bill is also rising. According to PwC, US healthcare costs this year have increased by around 8%, the highest in 13 years, mainly due to rising costs of imported drugs and equipment. As Rotterdam tightens, you'll have to pay more out of pocket, while your income remains unchanged, just to get timely care. In areas once dotted with Walgreens or CVS branches, you may now encounter the phenomenon of pharmacy deserts. Many rural regions in Mississippi, West Virginia, or Kansas have become places where you must drive 20 miles without finding a single open pharmacy. According to the Healthcare Access 2025 report, more than 6 million Americans now live in so-called pharmacy deserts, where drugstores are closing en masse due to skyrocketing import costs of pharmaceuticals and medical equipment from the EU. And when you go to Walmart, the cold medicine or insulin shelves are bare. At Target, only multivitamins remain. Without a reliable car or someone to take them, the elderly here simply have no way to buy enough medicine to survive the winter. But who's behind the decision to tighten Rotterdam's valve? In fact, the EU is considering retaliatory measures against US tax policies, and Rotterdam is one of the most effective control points. This policy could delay medical supply chains, or a risk highlighted by the Healthcare Cost Institute, which warns that if this persists, hospital costs may rise another 12-18% in the second half of 2025. That's a number everyone sees, but no one says out loud. Every tax dollar you pay is being exchanged in this valve war, and the Rotterdam valve is being slowly twisted shut. It doesn't stop there. US hospitals are urgently considering local stockpiling, storing goods, hoarding medical equipment on site. But that also means buying more stocking more, and you'll be the one footing the bill via insurance or higher taxes. Experts warn that if the supply chain isn't restored before this year's flu season, hospitals could face a break failure situation. When you look at your medicine bill, your auto-injector, your produce, basket missing juice bottles. Remember, Rotterdam is the medical heart valve of America. If that valve doesn't reopen in time, it's not just production that stops. Your health, your daily life will be the first to respond every single morning. Number 4, Busan, South Korea. You might have anticipated the earlier names Hamburg, Vancouver, Rotterdam. But this 4th name likely comes as a surprise. Few expected that even South Korea, America's technological backyard, its safest and most long-standing ally, would now quietly tighten its trade gates. Busan Port, the southern export jewel of South Korea, is the transit point for over 70% of the country's DRAM and NAND chips. It's no coincidence that most chips embedded in iPhones, iPads, MacBooks, Teslas, security cameras, ventilators in the US originate here. South Korea alone supplies about 36% of America's memory chip demand. Yet since May 2025, Busan has begun cutting exports to the US by nearly 40%, a reaction following Washington's announcement of considering tariffs up to 35% on imported semiconductors from South Korea. And we, the American people, are the ones feeling it most. Now, holding your iPhone, you realize the sleek aluminum case, once assured by a reliable source from Canada, has become more fragile due to tariffs and supply constraints in Vancouver. But if the exterior has been affected, the worst news lies within the very brain of the iPhone. The controller chip is also being squeezed this time from Busan, South Korea. A perfect double blow to the symbol of American tech. And that's why the new iPhone model this year might not hit the shelves on time. According to Bloomberg, the price of the new iPhone may rise by $300-500 due to the chip shortage from Busan. Those hoping for a new MacBook Pro or iPad will have to keep waiting or settle for lower specs, weaker performance, and higher prices. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. In Arizona and Texas, 3 major semiconductor production lines of Intel and TSMC have been forced to halt due to a shortage of raw materials from South Korea. An estimated 15,000 engineers and workers at these plants have been temporarily furloughed or had their hours reduced. Tesla's assembly plants in California, Ford in Michigan, and GM in Ohio are also facing severe shortages of battery control chips and safety sensors, forcing these companies to delay EV deliveries or even cancel some batches before the year-end holiday season. An EV without chips is like an iPhone without a processor. It simply doesn't run. And in retail systems, the consequences are already clear. Best Buy in Los Angeles has announced a sellout of new MacBooks. Walmart in Nevada has no PS5s on shelves, and the iPad Pro requires a month-long pre-order. According to a report by the Economic Policy Institute, this shortage has caused a sharp drop in electronics retail sales, pushing up the U.S. unemployment rate by 0.3 percentage points in the final quarter of this year, a large enough number to impact national consumption power. But what worries Americans most is the impact on essential medical devices. Blood pressure monitors, glucose testers, seemingly simple items all contain chips from Busan. When supply is squeezed, prices for these devices rose by an average of 22% in May alone, according to NIST data. For the elderly who check blood sugar daily, an increase of 50-70 a month for consumer-grade devices is no small matter. Not to mention Medicare and Medicaid insurance haven't adjusted in time, shifting the financial burden onto patients. You might think, does South Korea benefit from this? But the reality is the opposite. In Busan, over 20,000 containers of chips are stockpiled, unable to ship. Samsung and SK Hynix are forced to redirect orders to Europe and China, costly and time-consuming, plunging Seoul into its most severe tech export crisis in a decade. The South Korean government has had to allocate $30 billion for a domestic chip supply chain autonomy plan, but admits it will take at least 5-7 years to complete. Busan is the digital brain of the world, and when it's congested, every artery of the American economy, from consumer electronics to EVs and medical equipment, weakens. This is no longer just a story of factories or corporations. It's a story of every American household, from pre-share iPhones, delayed car deliveries, more expensive health monitors, to a standard of living eroded day by day with no end in sight. Number 5. Veracruz, Mexico. You don't need to look as far as Hamburg or Busan. Just Veracruz, a port right on America's doorstep, being tightened is enough to shake the daily meals of millions of American families. Veracruz, located along the Gulf of Mexico, is the largest transit hub between American and Mexican agriculture. Each year, the U.S. exports about 14.9 million tons of corn to Mexico, while importing thousands of tons of fresh vegetables, fruits, coffee, and avocados, items present in the daily meals of millions of middle-class American households. But since the implementation of a new policy imposing a 25% tariff on agricultural imports from Mexico, especially tomatoes, avocados, and coffee, Veracruz immediately became a choke point, disrupting this two-way food chain. Mexico's National Agriculture Council predicts that the price of imported vegetables into the U.S. will rise by at least 12% in Q3 this year, especially tomatoes, avocados, and coffee staples in every American breakfast or lunch. In California, where fresh salads and guacamole are routine, each avocado may cost twice as much. Premium tomatoes will exceed $4 a pound, a threshold last seen during the 2021 shortage. Florida and Texas, the two states that consume the most Mexican-imported fresh fruits, are in similar situations. Supermarkets reporting shortages, imported oranges and strawberries up nearly 15% in price. And it's not just consumers who are suffering. American farmers in the Midwest are taking a second blow after the Vancouver disruption. The USDA predicts corn and soybean exports to Mexico will drop by 7 to 10% in Q2 2025 due to the Veracruz clampdown. That means states like Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, home to over 70% of farmers aged over 50, will be hit hard. Warehouses full of unsold corn silos left idle farmers, cutting back production, delaying planting. Midwest banks are tightening credit warning of higher default risks due to unsold inventory. In California and Florida, where thousands of short-cycle vegetable farms operate, farmers are growing disheartened as prices fail to cover costs, and some have decided to abandon their fields. This reduces domestic supply, pushing U.S. vegetable prices up a painful paradox as America faces both import shortages and declining local production. In Mexico, the situation is no better. Nearly 200,000 port workers, truck drivers, and logistics staff in Veracruz are facing job scarcity. Jose, 55, a forklift driver at the port for over 2 decades, only received half the shifts last week compared to the month before. Small businesses dependent on U.S. corn imports are shutting down, restaurants are empty, and the portside commercial area sinks into gloom. The Mexican government threatens retaliation by imposing tariffs on American beef chicken and dairy pudding states like Texas and Nebraska, at risk of losing key markets. Across America, supermarkets are clearly feeling the squeeze. Walmart chains in Texas report a 30-40% drop in Mexican vegetables compared to last year. Aldi and Kroger stores in Florida face coffee shortages, high avocado prices, and many prolonged empty shelves. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, average at-home food prices rose 11% in just May and June 2025, partly due to the disrupted supply from Mexico. Consumers over 50 long accustomed to budgeting for weekend meals now must weigh every choice more carefully when walking into the grocery store. But the scariest impact isn't just about money, it's the loss of trust. When meals become expensive and scarce, when Midwest farmers go bankrupt due to lost Mexican markets, when California farms are abandoned for lack of buyers, Americans begin to ask, is this policy really for us? A quiet dissatisfaction is growing among those who once believed American agriculture was unshakable. Veracruz isn't a passing event. It's a sign that even daily meals, once simple ordinary, can be strangled by global policy. If not eased soon, the consequences won't just be a few $1 billion lost in trade, but the erosion of faith from millions of working families. And this wave isn't stopping. We now move on to even more surprising names on today's list. Number 6. Mundra, India. It only takes Mundra port, the world's largest export hub for generic drugs, to encounter disruption, for you to feel it the very next morning when you open your medicine cabinet. The familiar pills for diabetes, heart disease, or high blood pressure, the ones that keep you healthy every day, could become scarce, even double in price, without any economic storm or conflict. Mundra port, located in western India, has long been the transit point for about 40% of the generic drugs imported into the U.S. each year. In 2024, the U.S. imported over $9 billion worth of pharmaceuticals from India, most of it through Mundra. But since early June 2025, customs clearance at Mundra has slowed significantly, according to estimates from global shipping firms and trade organizations. Pharmaceutical shipments to the U.S. have dropped by about 30% due to tighter inspection and paperwork processes. The impact is seeping into every CVS and Walgreens across the U.S. If you rely on insulin, metformin, or common blood pressure meds like tens of millions of Americans over 50, the risk of shortages or price hikes is now imminent. A box of insulin that once cost $40 to $50 may now exceed $250. Each month you may need to spend an extra $500 to $700 just to maintain your existing prescriptions. Over $6,000 per year, a real burden for those living on pensions or assistance. Major health insurers aren't spared from this storm. According to a recent GAO report, if Mundra continues to slow exports for another 3 months, the U.S. healthcare system, including Medicare and Medicaid, could face an additional $5-6 billion in costs. This could lead to higher premiums or reduced coverage costs that you, the longtime policyholder, will have to bear. What's alarming is that these effects will hit states like Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, first places with high proportions of seniors and chronic illness rates. A heart pill or insulin vial is no longer just a medical cost, it's a looming worry in the monthly household budget. That's when you'll have to ask yourself, should I buy heart meds this month or save the money for summer electricity and gas bills? And the story doesn't stop in America. In India, especially around Mundra, many pharma businesses and factories are being forced to reduce shifts or scale down due to plummeting U.S. orders. Local logistics insiders report a nearly 20% rise in backlogged pharmaceutical containers this past month. Yet instead of pushing back, the Indian government is cautious, seeing this as a necessary move while trade negotiations with the U.S. continue. For you, the American consumer, each day waiting for restocked meds adds anxiety. The FDA has listed over 270 drugs as in shortage, mostly common generics, as of April 2025. If the supply chain for Mundra isn't unblocked soon, hundreds more could face the same fate in the coming months. Rural and remote states with fewer local pharmaceutical options could be hit hardest, forcing residents to travel farther, pay more just to buy what was once a basic drug. The irony is, even if Americans want to switch to domestically produced meds, they often can't. The Civica RX program, touted as a solution to localized drug production, currently meets less than 15% of market demand. America's self-sufficiency in affordable medicine will take another 3 to 5 years to materialize, barring massive new investment. As medicine becomes scarce and costly, you worry not just about your health, but your wallet, your family's future, and the fragile stability of retirement life. Remember how some hesitated to buy an iPhone when chip shortages drove up prices, but when your daily medication doubles in cost, Hesitation is no longer an option. Mundra, therefore, is not just a distant name on the logistics map. It's the valve controlling the health and lives of millions of Americans, a valve now being gradually tightened. And as this gate closes, another weak point, even closer and more essential, is quietly revealing itself, waiting at the end of this list. Number 7. Santos, Brazil. If you thought the pressure from Hamburg, Vancouver, or Mundra was enough to suffocate the US economy, then Santos, the largest port in South America, is the final blow. As Santos accelerates its exports of soybeans, corn, and wheat to the world, especially to the largest global markets, American agricultural products, once the pride of the Midwest, are being gradually pushed aside. In just the first half of 2025, Santos handled over 108 million tons of soybeans, nearly 76% of which went directly to Asian countries. Meanwhile, the US, once the global leader, has only managed to export just over 45 million tons. The U.S. Department of Agriculture (USDA) warns in Q2 2025 alone, the U.S. lost nearly $6.5 billion in soybean export value, causing domestic agricultural prices to plummet by 10 to 15%. This means if you live in Iowa, Nebraska, or Kansas regions that grow corn and soybeans for export, low selling prices have slashed seasonal income, and small farms are facing the risk of sell-offs or heavy losses. Regional banks in the Midwest have started tightening credit, with lending rates for farmers rising due to fears of capital loss. This not only impacts soybean growers, but also affects the cattle and pork industries, which rely on cheap corn and soy as feed. When feed prices go up, the cost of producing beef and chicken rises, and you, the consumer, end up paying more for every pound of meat at your local Walmart or Kroger. On the other side of the globe, the port of Santos is more bustling than ever. Domestic and international investors are pouring over $3.3 billion into expanding loading capacity, and soybean storage facilities are being upgraded to meet growing demand. Workers at Santos are benefiting from a flood of orders, rising wages, and constant overtime shifts, a stark contrast to the quiet cornfields of the American Midwest, where processing machines are going silent and warehouses are packed with unsold grain. But the impact doesn't stop with farmers. As the U.S. loses its international agricultural markets, the surplus in domestic supply drives prices down. Yet this doesn't help buyers because processed products like soybean oil, canned food, and even livestock feed are all affected by rising production costs. You may soon see your monthly grocery bill increase by $50 to $100 by the end of this year, in a context where electricity, gas, and medicine prices are already at record highs. Santos is not just some distant seaport. It's like a valve gradually shutting down the export path that American farmers have held for half a century. And when the soybean presses in the Midwest fall silent, when overflowing silos are no longer being emptied, the most worrying question emerges: who is still willing to cooperate with us when the hands we once held are slowly pulling away? 7 seaports, 7 seemingly distant links are tightening their grip on the daily lives of each of us. From delayed smartphone releases, scarce new cars, rising drug prices, to costlier food, it all stems from the closing gates of global trade with America. It's not just a concern for factories or big businesses. This affects every meal, every bill of every household, especially those over 50 people who have fewer chances to adapt when prices change drastically day by day. And as those gates remain closed, the question is no longer, when will exports recover, but rather, how can we protect our wallets and lives as they are being squeezed little by little? If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next content where we uncover the stories that mainstream media often overlooks. All analyses in the video are based on current data and independent perspectives, and are not intended to offer absolute predictions.